Deploy that patch and you are out. Chad Montgomery's voice cut through the chilled atmosphere of the emergency server room like a jagged razor blade. His face was flushed crimson, thick veins bulging at his temples as he jabbed an aggressive finger toward my workstation. I do not care what your diagnostic metrics say, Vance. We have heavy institutional investors watching this rollout, and I am not going to let some paranoid senior systems architect derail our quarterly expansion goals. My fingers hovered steadily above the keyboard. 12 years. 12 solid years of flawless system runs, absolute zero critical outages, and a solid professional reputation that had elevated me from a Cincinnati community college to a major enterprise cloud infrastructure firm. And now, at 48 years old, I stood at a crossroads where a single keystroke would either protect millions of end users or cost me the executive career I had built from nothing. I glanced down at the automated diagnostic logs. Bright red warning banners flooded the terminal, representing a ticking time bomb buried in our core validation pipeline. Then I turned to look at Chad Montgomery, the vice president of engineering who had spent the last 8 months creating a toxic corporate culture. Chad viewed my engineering caution as administrative inertia and my meticulous adherence to security protocols as cowardice. You do not grasp the catastrophic risk you are demanding, I said quietly. What I grasp, Chad snarled, stepping closer until I could smell the sharp tang of his expensive cologne, is that you are exactly one keystroke away from permanent unemployment. If you deploy that unapproved fix right now, security will clear out your desk before you reach the lobby. I took a deep, steadying breath. I thought about the core principles that had guided my life. Then I pressed the execution key and deployed the patch anyway. The central terminal flashed emerald green. Patch implementation verified. Status optimal. Every internal risk alarm in my head was ringing with deafening intensity, but I had executed what 12 years of deep architectural mastery told me was necessary. Then I logged off my administrative account. I stood up, retrieved my personal belongings, and walked out of the server room while Chad sputtered threats behind me. What occurred over the following 72 hours did not merely ruin Chad Montgomery. It dismantled a corporate facade and exposed executive negligence. My name is Jason Vance. Until that tense March afternoon, I served as senior systems architect at Forge Technologies, an enterprise computing provider in the Midwest. My corporate title carried significant prestige, but I did not inherit wealth or connections. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Cincinnati where community was our safety net. My mother pulled double shifts at a manufacturing plant to keep food on our table. From her, I absorbed a foundational lesson. Technical skill without personal integrity is merely a dangerous tool. That conviction governed my trajectory at Forge Technologies. When I joined 12 years ago, we were a disciplined technology firm, guided by our founding chairman, Walter Hargrove. Walter believed enterprise software should function as an unshakable foundation for business operations. Technology must serve human progress, not reckless speculation, he would remind us. I started as an infrastructure specialist, having funded my degree through night shifts. Walter took a chance on my analytical mindset, recognizing that I viewed cloud infrastructure not merely as code, but as digital ecosystems where every function impacted real people on the other end. Over the next decade, I advanced through technical precision and unyielding commitment to system safety. By my 5th year, I led the core infrastructure security division. By my 8th year, I authored the foundational framework for our primary product line, the Nexus Cloud Architecture. Nexus executed high-volume data analytics and secure real-time transaction processing for over 3,000 corporate enterprises globally. Under my supervision, operational uptime remained absolute. I built redundant, fail-safe mechanisms and predictive monitoring that caught anomalies before they caused failures. It was exhaustive engineering rigor. However, corporate entities evolve, and rapid public valuation often attracts leadership motivated purely by short-term gain. 2 years ago, after Forge Technologies executed its initial public offering, our board pushed Walter Hargrove into a ceremonial advisory role. To drive aggressive quarterly revenue metrics, the board recruited Chad Montgomery as our new vice president of engineering. Chad arrived boasting an Ivy League degree and a history at tech startups that prioritize speed over security. He possessed zero tolerance for structural compliance or what he mockingly termed legacy caution. From his very first executive briefing, Chad made his philosophy clear. The fundamental problem with Forge Technologies, he declared while pacing before our senior staff, is that this engineering division has become soft and overly conservative. We are sitting on high-capacity architecture that could generate triple its current subscription revenue if we simply stop letting regulatory fears and redundant testing cycles restrict our deployment speed. He stared directly at me as he emphasized the word fear. Over the subsequent 18 months, Chad dismantled our quality assurance framework. He slashed testing schedules by 50%, merged separate validation teams into overworked units, and forced out veteran engineers who raised technical objections. In their place, he promoted young, compliant developers who embraced his move-fast methodology without question. The underlying structural crisis began 3 months prior to my eventual termination. Chad initiated what he branded as Project Velocity, an overhaul of the Nexus engine designed to scale client transaction throughput fivefold. On paper, the metrics looked extraordinary for prospective shareholders. In practical execution, it was a high-risk gamble that violated fundamental engineering boundaries. Chad routed the project around my review committee, assigning development to his protege, a 26-year-old software developer named Cody Brooks. Cody coded at blinding speed, but he regarded integration testing as an unnecessary burden. Although Chad had isolated my office from Project Velocity, my responsibilities as senior systems architect still mandated continuous oversight of the broader Nexus environment. By late February, our network monitoring tools began detecting subtle structural anomalies. Microsecond latency spikes appeared in client database queries. Memory leaks were recorded across distributed server clusters, and automated error reporting systems were being manually suppressed at the administrative level. Recognizing the signs of deeper instability, I conducted a forensic audit of the newly integrated code repositories. What I uncovered in Cody Brooks's codebase was deeply alarming. In their rush to maximize processing speed, Cody's team had rewritten core validation routines within the Nexus data management layer. To achieve artificial benchmarks, they had completely disabled several safety checks and fail-safe protocols that I had embedded into the original system. Worse still, their revised logic created severe race conditions, situations where concurrent database read and write requests competed for system resources, leading to potential data corruption during peak processing volumes. It was the equivalent of removing brakes from a high-speed train to save weight. The train might run faster on a straight track, but catastrophe is guaranteed the moment it encounters a sharp curve. I spent 3 days compiling a technical assessment. I built models showing how race conditions would cause failures under heavy loads. Furthermore, I authored a comprehensive remediation plan, showing how we could achieve Chad's desired throughput gains safely without compromising data integrity or violating federal software compliance benchmarks. I scheduled a private conference with Chad, hoping that an objective presentation of empirical data would convince him to adjust course. Chad barely glanced at the diagnostic charts resting on his desk. You accessed Project Velocity's source repository without explicit authorization from my office, he said coldly. As senior systems architect, my corporate mandate requires me to audit any codebase that interfaces with core enterprise infrastructure, I replied calmly. Chad, the telemetry data is indisputable. These race conditions are not theoretical anomalies. Under sustained commercial load, this code will fail. These warnings are merely conservative assumptions rooted in your outdated methodology. Chad countered, waving his hand dismissively. Cody's team has executed their own benchmarks. The performance numbers are revolutionary, and our public launch schedule is locked. Frankly, Jason, this looks like another attempt to undermine my leadership because you cannot handle the fact that modern engineering has outgrown your rigid standards. This is not a personal dispute about leadership styles, I insisted, keeping my composure. This is about code that carries structural defects. When these race conditions trigger in a live environment, the failure will corrupt client databases and shut down enterprise operations across multiple sectors. Your feedback has been logged, Chad replied with icy finality. Project Velocity deploys on schedule in 2 weeks. I strongly advise you to concentrate on your assigned maintenance tickets and stop interfering with core innovation. Refusing to let executive arrogance destroy 12 years of reliable infrastructure, I escalated the issue to our founder, Walter Hargrove. Although Walter had been relegated to an advisory corner office, his ethical commitment to Forge Technologies remained intact. He reviewed my technical documentation meticulously and spent 2 hours asking precise questions about our redundancy models. This structural risk is profound, Jason, Walter admitted, rubbing his temples with a heavy sigh. The data corruption vectors you identified are unmistakable. Then you must intervene with the board, I urged. Mandate a temporary halt to the rollout until Cody's team integrates proper safety protocols. Walter looked out the window at the city skyline, his expression burdened with regret. I can present your findings to the audit committee, Jason, but you must understand how much the balance of power has shifted. The board recruited Chad specifically because they wanted aggressive growth metrics to boost equity valuations. If I challenge his executive decisions without immediate financial losses on the ledger, the board will simply view it as an old founder resisting modern expansion. So, we are going to permit a flawed system to go live and put 3,000 enterprise clients at risk? I asked, unable to conceal my disappointment. I will do what I can at the next board assembly, Walter said quietly. But you need to prepare yourself for the reality that Chad's posture is backed by corporate leadership. Recognizing that internal channels were stalling, I exercised my legal rights under corporate risk governance standards. I submitted a formal, confidential risk assessment report directly to the Board of Directors Technology Oversight Committee, highlighting potential breaches of fiduciary duty and risks under federal securities regulations. The response from executive leadership was immediate and hostile. The following morning, Chad summoned me to his corner office. He stood motionless before the floor-to-ceiling glass, his posture rigid with fury. I am currently evaluating, he said without turning around, whether your actions constitute severe professional incompetence or deliberate corporate sabotage. I am executing my sworn fiduciary duty to protect this corporation and its clients from catastrophic infrastructure failure. I answered firmly. Chad spun around, his eyes burning with hostility. You bypassed my executive authority and submitted an unapproved document to the board committee. You spread panic about a flagship project you were not assigned to manage. That is gross insubordination. The board has a legal right to be informed of critical infrastructure vulnerabilities. Before commercial deployment, I stated. The board, Chad sneered, walking up to me, has complete confidence in my strategic direction. They understand enterprise evolution requires calculated risk. What they do not need is a washed-up architect using fear tactics to justify his relevance. You have 2 choices left at this company. You can fall in line, support Project Velocity's launch, and preserve your employment, or you can continue this crusade, in which case I will ensure your career in this industry is permanently finished. I chose to remain silent and return to my workstation. My primary motivation was not preserving my title, but maintaining operational access to our core systems so I could mitigate damage when failures began to surface. 2 weeks later, Chad officially deployed Project Velocity to our global enterprise network. Ton-migration processing metrics surged, and performance dashboards displayed green status indicators across all regions. But beneath the polished surface of his metrics, the structural defects were already compounding. I monitored system telemetry around the clock. Within 96 hours, subtle data anomalies accumulated in core ledgers. As synchronous database operations surged, the race conditions in Cody Brooks's code began triggering micro-failures. Database write operations dropped validation flags, causing record duplications and data desynchronization across secondary storage nodes. The first major warning materialized on the 5th day after launch. One of our key financial enterprise clients, Titan Core Financial, reported a significant discrepancy during their end-of-day reconciliation. Over 48,000 records had been duplicated across cloud storage buckets. However, their chief information officer lodged a formal complaint with our client services division. I immediately analyzed the incident, traced the precise execution path back to Cody's flawed race condition, and authored a lightweight hotfix patch. My patch restored essential verification checks while maintaining 95% of performance gains. I submitted the hotfix to Chad with an urgent memorandum explaining that these data anomalies would scale exponentially as client transaction volume increased. Chad's electronic response was brief and dismissive. Isolated client configuration error already resolved by support team. No systemic defect confirmed. Resume your primary duties. Instead of addressing code corruption, Chad instructed client services to suppress technical complaints. But complex enterprise systems do not tolerate hidden structural defects. By the end of the second week, minor data errors were occurring daily across enterprise accounts. The inevitable catastrophe struck exactly 14 days after Project Velocity went live. Hartwell Industries, one of our top 10 clients, suffered a total system collapse. During their peak operational cycle, the race condition triggered a massive cascading deadlock across primary database clusters. Their automated logistics platforms froze entirely for 6 continuous hours, halting physical distribution centers across North America. Hartwell's executive leadership was enraged. Their legal counsel issued an immediate notice of contract termination, threatening a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for breach of service-level agreements. Because the outage exceeded critical contract thresholds, automated alert notifications were instantly dispatched to our board of directors and executive leadership team. An emergency session of the board's technology committee was convened at 8 in the morning. Chad attempted to spin the Hartwell disaster as an unprecedented anomaly. However, Chairman Walter Hargrove insisted that I present an independent architectural analysis to the committee. Standing before the board, I projected diagnostic logs onto the display screens. I walked the directors through the failure timeline, demonstrating how the race condition in Cody's unvetted code directly caused the Hartwell database deadlock. I revealed my original risk assessment from 3 months prior and presented my fully tested hotfix patch, which stood ready for immediate deployment. "How long has this corrective patch been available?" inquired Grant Monroe, the senior board member heading the technology committee. "I created the patch 2 weeks ago, Mr. Monroe," I replied. "I requested deployment authorization multiple times, but management determined the risks did not warrant intervention." Grant Monroe turned toward Chad. "Why was a fully validated security patch withheld when client systems demonstrated instability?" Chad shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "We were gathering additional diagnostic data to ensure the patch would not create unforeseen software conflicts," Chad claimed smoothly. "Jason has an established pattern of overreacting to minor operational metrics. The Hartwell collapse shut down a Fortune 500 client for 6 hours and exposed this firm to immense financial liabilities," Grant Monroe interjected firmly. "That is not overreaction. That is accurate predictive engineering." He turned to me. "Can your patch be deployed tonight without causing further client downtime?" "Yes, sir," I confirmed. "I can execute the deployment during our scheduled 5:30 maintenance window." Grant Monroe looked at Walter Hargrove, then back at Chad. "Deployment of Jason Vance's patch is formally authorized for this evening under direct board oversight." Chad remained motionless as the meeting adjourned, but as I collected my materials, he cast a glance in my direction that signaled intense retaliation. At 5:30 that evening, the main engineering office had largely emptied. I sat at my workstation in the server room, checking our rollback configurations as the maintenance window approached. The heavy security door hissed open, and Chad walked inside, closing the door behind him to lock us in the soundproof room. His composure was completely shattered. "You think you won a victory in that boardroom today, Vance?" he whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "You humiliated me in front of Grant Monroe and the founding directors." "I did not seek to humiliate anyone, Chad," I responded. "I presented objective technical facts to prevent our clients from suffering catastrophic data loss." "You are going to log into that administrative console right now," Chad commanded, stepping directly into my personal space. "And you are going to submit a formal ticket stating that additional testing requires postponing tonight's deployment. My team will take over the patch logic tomorrow." I looked at him with quiet resolve. I will not comply. The board authorized this deployment specifically to prevent another client collapse. Every hour this flawed code runs, we risk permanent data corruption. Deploy that patch tonight and you are out. Chad bellowed, his voice bouncing off the steel server racks. I do not care what your diagnostic screens say, Vance. I am not letting a subordinate destroy my authority. You execute that script and your career is finished. 15 minutes remain to weigh 12 years of corporate security against professional survival. I thought about my mother's work ethic, the working class community that raised me, and the core principle that technical authority must always serve human safety over personal ambition. You are asking me to put thousands of enterprise businesses at risk to protect your executive vanity, I said quietly. That is a compromise I will never make. Chad's face turned pale with anger. You are making the absolute worst decision of your life. Perhaps, I replied. But I will live with a clear conscience. As the clock struck 5:30, I initiated the administrative sequence. My fingers moved across the keyboard with absolute precision. System status, maintenance mode active, patch deployment sequence initiated. For 43 minutes, I monitored the execution pipeline. Terminal indicators flashed green across every server node. Cody's flawed race conditions were purged, replaced by optimized validation routines. The Nexus platform returned to live status, running smoother and more secure than at any point since its inception. My structural fix was complete, flawless, and permanent. Then I logged off my administrative account for the last time. I opened my desk drawers, placed my personal items into a leather bag, and stood up. You are terminated effective immediately for gross insubordination. Chad choked out, his hands shaking. Security will escort you out of the building. I will save them the walk, I replied quietly. I know where the exit is. I walked through the quiet office corridors where I had spent 12 years of my life. Nora, Walter Hargrove's executive assistant, watched me approach with tears in her eyes. Take care of yourself, Jason, she whispered. Tell Walter I did everything I could to protect his legacy, I said softly. I stepped out into the crisp March air, carrying a small bag of belongings and 12 years of unblemished professional pride. I had no new employment lined up, no corporate safety net, and no certainty about my future. But I walked away knowing I had refused to break under toxic pressure. I slept fitfully that night, my mind repeatedly reviewing the events of the evening. Had I overlooked any edge cases in my patch? Would Chad attempt to tamper with deployment logs to shift blame onto my configuration? At 7:10 in the morning, I was awakened by a series of phone notifications. My mobile screen displayed 17 missed calls and 43 unread messages from former colleagues and industry contacts. My initial instinct was a surge of panic, assuming my patch had somehow triggered a secondary system failure. But as I opened industry news feeds, I realized the unfolding disaster at Forge Technologies was far larger than Project Velocity. While Chad Montgomery had been obsessively fighting my infrastructure patch, a completely separate operational catastrophe had detonated within the company. A disaster spawned entirely by Chad's reckless management. 3 months earlier, parallel to Project Velocity, Chad had commissioned a secondary internal initiative designated as Project Streamline. Its stated purpose was to modernize Forge's back-end administrative infrastructure, including billing databases, employee access control, and user authentication logs. Chad had assigned Project Streamline to another compliant developer named Cole Kozowski, deliberately bypassing our security auditing framework to accelerate implementation. Because Project Streamline was classified as an internal administrative update rather than a client-facing product, it had never appeared on my architectural review schedule. I had been so fully consumed with mitigating the public risks of Project Velocity that Cole Kozowski's back-end code went unscrutinized. That structural gap was precisely what Chad had counted on to bypass technical oversight. Cole Kozowski had been tasked with updating cryptographic hashing routines used for user authentication. In his rush to meet Chad's arbitrary deadline, Cole made a catastrophic architectural error. During a live data migration cycle that lasted approximately 90 seconds, the system temporarily recorded active administrative credentials into unencrypted plaintext debugging logs. Worse still, Due to misconfigured storage permissions, those unencrypted log files were automatically archived to an external backup server that lacked basic multi-factor authentication and firewalls. In early March, unauthorized malicious actors discovered the exposed backup directory. They extracted the unencrypted files, and at 2:30 in the morning following my termination, published over 47,000 enterprise user credentials onto a prominent public cybersecurity forum. The leaked credential database contained administrative access keys for several of Forge's largest corporate and financial clients. By sunrise, malicious unauthorized logins were detected across enterprise networks, triggering emergency security lockdowns nationwide. Under federal cybersecurity standards and corporate governance regulations, an enterprise infrastructure firm experiencing a credential breach of this magnitude is required to execute immediate incident response protocols, notify affected clients within specified timeframes, issue mandatory credential resets, inform regulatory bodies, and publish transparent remediation steps. However, Chad Montgomery had systematically dismantled Forge's established emergency response framework over the preceding 18 months, replacing discipline protocols with an informal executive approval structure. Chad spent the first 6 critical hours following breach disclosure trying to orchestrate a PR cover-up to shield himself from personal liability rather than taking decisive action to secure client infrastructure. By noon, the technology news ecosystems was flooded with reports of the breach. Cybersecurity researchers published analyses exposing Forge's inadequate security measures. Corporate clients publicly condemned the company's silence, and federal regulators initiated preliminary inquiries into potential violations of investor disclosure requirements under federal securities law. The public exposure rapidly escalated into an existential corporate crisis. Tech news outlets obtained leaked copies of my internal risk assessment report, the document I had submitted to the board committee 3 months prior. The published documents proved beyond doubt that executive management had been repeatedly warned about systemic security failures, that testing protocols had been deliberately slashed, and that senior technical staff had been fired for attempting to enforce safety compliance. The market reaction was swift and devastating. Wall Street investors dumped Forge Technologies stock en masse. Within 72 hours of the credential leak, the company's market capitalization plummeted by 40%. Major enterprise accounts canceled subscription contracts in rapid succession. Hartwell Industries finalized its legal termination, and dozens of enterprise clients migrated their infrastructure to Pekin providers. Facing catastrophic financial ruin and potential regulatory prosecution, the board of directors convened an emergency executive assembly. Founding chairman Walter Hargrove presented a dossier documenting every ignored risk warning, every bypassed safety audit, and every improper directive issued by Chad Montgomery during his tenure. During the proceedings, Grant Monroe explicitly questioned the board regarding my termination. Walter revealed that I had been fired by Chad on the very night I successfully deployed the patch that stabilized the Nexus platform. Subsequent independent forensic audits confirmed that my final patch had functioned perfectly, preventing any further data corruption on the client network. On Friday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after my walkout, the board of directors formally terminated Chad Montgomery for gross executive negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. The corporate press release was brief and cold. Chad Montgomery has been removed from his position effective immediately. The company reserves all legal rights regarding executive misconduct. Chad's downfall was absolute. Multiple enterprise clients named him personally as a co-defendant in civil lawsuits alleging gross negligence. Furthermore, the Securities and Exchange Commission launched a formal investigation into whether Chad had knowingly misrepresented software stability metrics to public investors. Within weeks, the total financial impact of the crisis on Forge Technologies, including lost contracts, legal settlements, emergency security overhauls, and regulatory fines, was calculated at a staggering $144 million. $144 million in total destruction, because an arrogant executive believed speed and personal ambition were superior to engineering integrity and structural discipline. Following my departure from Forge Technologies, I felt deeply vindicated that my technical assessments had proven accurate. Though I took no pleasure in watching the enterprise suffer damage, then my phone began ringing again, but this time the calls were of a vastly different nature. The first call arrived from Walter Hargrove. "Jason, I am calling to offer you my most sincere personal apology," Walter said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I should have backed you with the full weight of my authority months ago. I allowed corporate politics and short-term market pressures to sway my judgment, and I failed to protect the engineer who was keeping this company safe. That failure rests entirely on me." "I appreciate your honesty, Walter," I replied quietly. "It is not merely an apology, Jason," Walter continued. "The board has asked me to step back into the executive role to steer this corporation through restructuring. I refuse to undertake this task unless you return to lead our engineering division. We want you as Chief Technology Officer, with total executive authority over infrastructure, security, and quality assurance, reporting directly to me." Before I could evaluate Walter's offer, executive recruiters began reaching out. Recognizing the value of an architect who was willing to defend system security. Among those inquiries was a call from Simone Thatcher, Chief Executive Officer of Avalon Systems, Ford's primary competitor. "Jason," Simone said during our initial conference, "we have watched your track record for years. Your engineering rigor with the Nexus architecture was legendary, but your refusal to deploy compromised code under extreme executive pressure demonstrated something far more valuable: unyielding professional character. At Avalon Systems, we do not view safety audits as obstacles. We view them as our competitive advantage. I want you to join us as Executive Vice President of Infrastructure Architecture." The offer from Avalon Systems provided a superior executive compensation package, complete authority over system design, and most importantly, an established corporate culture that genuinely respected technical integrity. While a part of me felt sentimental attachment to Walter Hargrove, I recognized that rebuilding Forge Technologies would require years of damage control. Avalon Systems represented an environment where I could innovate without constantly defending fundamental safety standards. I accepted Simone Thatcher's offer and assumed my new role at Avalon Systems. 3 months into my tenure at Avalon, I was reviewing infrastructure blueprints in my executive office when my administrative assistant informed me that a visitor was waiting in the main lobby without an appointment. "He claims his name is Chad Montgomery," she noted with hesitation. I paused for a moment. I could have easily instructed security to escort him off the property, but curiosity prompted me to grant the meeting. "Send him in," I instructed. Moments later, Chad walked into my office, looking visibly worn with deep, dark circles beneath his eyes. "Jason," Chad said quietly, standing near the doorway. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." I remained seated behind my desk, observing him silently. "I came here to deliver a personal apology," Chad continued, his voice lacking any of its former sharp authority. "I was wrong about Project Velocity. I was wrong about your engineering standards. You were attempting to protect the company from catastrophe, and my arrogance blinded me to the truth." I listened to his words without expression. "Why are you here today, Chad?" I asked plainly. "What is the real purpose of this visit?" Chad hesitated, shifting nervously before offering a quiet explanation. "I am trying to establish an independent technology consulting firm. However, the litigation surrounding the Forge Technologies collapse has ruined my professional reputation. No prospective client will retain my services without credible industry references. I am asking if you would be willing to provide a neutral professional statement or perhaps connect me with contacts who might need basic technical consulting." The audacity of his request was staggering. The executive who had terminated me for protecting client data was now asking me to validate his credibility. "Let me ensure I comprehend your request fully," I said, leaning forward. "You want me to recommend your leadership to corporate clients based on your performance at Forge Technologies?" Chad flinched slightly. "I have learned profound lessons from those failures, Jason. I understand now what you were trying to teach me about system safety." "You understand now?" I repeated evenly. After $144 million in corporate damage. After 47,000 user credentials were compromised. After you terminated the architect who saved your primary platform from total collapse? Now you claim to understand? Jason, please, Chad pleaded softly. I have no executive options left in this industry. Here is what you fail to grasp about leadership, Chad, I said firmly. True empathy and professional courtesy do not mean enabling irresponsible behavior. Standing for integrity requires holding reckless individuals accountable for the consequences of their choices. I cannot provide a reference for you because I do not believe in the toxic management philosophy you represent. I will not recommend you to enterprise clients because I respect their operational safety and as I have witnessed the destruction that occurs under your direction. Chad's face flushed with a brief flash of his former anger, but he no longer possessed authority to intimidate anyone. So that is it, Chad said bitterly. You are going to block me from rebuilding my career? I am not blocking anything, Chad, I replied with absolute clarity. I am simply declining to endorse your conduct. You authored your own professional reputation through your actions at Forge Technologies. The consequences of those actions belong entirely to you. Chad stood silent for a moment, realizing that his attempt at manipulation had failed completely. He turned toward the door, pausing briefly at the exit. So obsessed being right, Jason, he muttered in a final attempt to justify himself. You never understood how to take real corporate risks. I smiled calmly as I met his gaze. I took the greatest professional risk of my life when I deployed that patch, knowing you would fire me for doing the right thing. The difference between us, Chad, is that I took a risk to protect thousands of innocent clients, while you took risks to feed your executive vanity. That is why I am leading infrastructure at a premier enterprise firm, and you are begging for references. Chad exited my office without offering another word. I never saw him again. Standing by my window watching Chad leave, I experienced a deep sense of peace. 12 years of engineering work and one defining choice had preserved my character. The real victory was that structural integrity prevailed over corporate arrogance. In an industry obsessed with moving fast, the ultimate strength lies in building systems that endure. Chad tried to build an empire through shortcuts. Instead, he became a warning. I chose integrity over pressure, and reality validated my choice. That is the true essence of accountability. Not vengeance, but complete vindication. If this story resonated with your own professional journey, if you have ever faced a choice between taking the easy path or standing firm for what is right, I invite you to join our community here at Payback Office. Subscribe to our channel as we work toward our goal of 7,000 subscribers who believe that doing the right thing still matters in today's corporate world. Thank you for listening, and remember, your integrity is worth more than any job that demands you compromise your values.